If I were to decide tomorrow that I was a 47-year-old woman, should I be allowed to go shower in a women's locker room?
Nobody in their right mind wants to see a grown adult man, a stranger, alone in a bathroom with little girls.
And it's very wrong and closed-minded of you to keep boys out of the girls' room. Why, of course the girls' room is for boys. That's why it's called the girls' room, if the boys say that they're girls, right? That's what the experts say.
A woman should not be in a locker room having to worry about someone from the opposite sex being in their locker room.
JFK wanted to send a man to the moon. Obama wants to send a man to the women's restroom.
Yeah, it's gonna be one of those videos. Trans people face a lot of stigma in the United States. Whether it's access to gender-affirming care, negative social stigma in classrooms, in the workplace, or general exclusion and bigotry, or sometimes outright violence, the struggles are nearly endless. But one specific kind of transphobia sticks in my mind like a brain worm feasting on my frontal lobe, and that is bathroom bills. To say that conservatives have been obsessed with trans people, especially for the last 8 years or so, would be an understatement. Despite trans people making up less than 1% of the US population, we've seen literally hundreds of pieces of legislation targeted specifically at them. These bills have represented a sort of legal method of attack against trans people, and the rejection of nonconformity by the conservative, often very religious, right wing of this country. But bathroom bills specifically highlight the insanity of this moral panic in a very tangible way, because there is literally no basis for them whatsoever. And in this video, I'm going to tell you why. Despite how niche the issue is, bathroom bills are surprisingly prevalent throughout the country.
And Governor Stitt also signing a bill requiring public school children to only use the bathroom of the sex listed on their birth certificate.
It's called the Safety in Private Spaces Act, but it's all about Florida bathrooms. Recently getting the governor's signature, the new law makes it a crime for someone to use restrooms or locker rooms that don't align with their sex at birth. It applies to publicly owned facilities, including schools.
And that law mandates that Idaho public schools be required to maintain bathrooms and changing rooms on the basis of biological sex, and that is the sex of a person that they were assigned at birth.
House Bill 608 advanced out of committee. It puts major restrictions on where transgender people are allowed. The bill defines gender the same as biological sex. It would mean that transgender people would have to use bathrooms, locker rooms, and dorms that align with their sex at birth.
With all these legislators and political commentators talking about the importance of bathrooms, surely there's some kind of necessity behind it, right? No. Now, I must say up front, I am a cisgender man, so I do not have firsthand experience with the issue that I'm going to be talking about. So just know I'm approaching this topic with maximum humility. Also, if you're a trans or non-binary person that wants to fill in the blanks here or fill in spots that I missed in this video, please feel free to do so in the comments and only share what you're comfortable in sharing, of course. Nevertheless, as a cis man, I feel uniquely positioned to talk about this issue to people that maybe wouldn't listen if it wasn't somebody that looks like me and talks like me. My goal here is for this video to be a sort of resource that you can send to family or friends or whoever that has a subpar understanding of the issue. You can fast forward to this timestamp here to get right to the arguments. But before we get started, let's make sure we can speak the same language. When we're talking about bathroom bills, we're talking about pieces of legislation or policies that deny trans people the ability to use the bathroom that aligns with their gender identity. They're often focused on public bathrooms, those inside government buildings, schools, and so on. Also, conservatives tend to use language like biological males in women's bathrooms. I'm not going to be doing that. I'm not even going to entertain that rhetoric. I'm simply going to use the correct term, trans woman, for example. So let's go through the three main arguments against inclusive bathroom policies. And at the end, maybe we can uncover a deeper meaning for all of this.
Argument 1. Inclusive bathrooms are unnecessary.
The implication here, of course, is that trans people should just use the bathroom that aligns with the gender that was assigned to them at birth. This one isn't really an argument, it's more of a demand, but it's one I've seen repeated enough times to bring up here. And without the evidence necessary to support such a demand, and we'll get into the evidence soon, this just comes across as naked bigotry. And with the argument of just use the correct bathroom, comes the question of, how would you even know? A question I had when I started researching for this topic, and a question I still have now is, how do you even enforce these bathroom policies? Are we doing mandatory genital inspections at the door? Even that would be prone to error, let alone a massive invasion of privacy. One that I'm sure all those throwing a sissy fit over this issue would not want to have to deal with. This, of course, leads me to assume that the real enforcement mechanism is fellow citizens using the restroom and abrasively calling people out that they think are trans and maybe getting the police involved. People that are fine with the solution usually say something like, "We can always tell," but you can't. You really can't. Despite the caricature of trans people that Fox News may have painted for you, you can't always tell. Some trans people can pass, and I'd never make the argument that you need to pass in order to be valid as a trans person, but I will say that sending a passing trans man, for example, to the women's restroom is going to cause a whole other host of issues. It only makes sense for trans people to use the bathroom that aligns with their gender identity. Otherwise, these policies just feed a moral panic and cause more conflict. So to address the sort of pseudo-argument from the beginning, it just doesn't make sense to force trans people to use a bathroom that doesn't align with their gender identity.
Argument number 2, just make separate bathrooms.
Okay. With this argument, at least we're kind of getting somewhere, because this one is sort of an attempted solution after conservatives recognize that yes, in fact, trans people do have to use the bathroom. And immediately it screams separate but equal, which from history we should infer that that probably won't work out very well. More seriously though, there are already gender neutral bathrooms in a lot of public spaces that sort of serve that purpose, and I'm fine with the existence of gender neutral bathrooms. I think they can be helpful, but these aren't trans people bathrooms. They're gender neutral. And to require by law that trans people be designated, be relegated to separate bathroom spaces is unnecessary and cruel. Not only is there no empirical reason for it, which again we'll get into in a moment, it's frankly a waste of time and money in terms of building the infrastructure. Before getting into the empirical nature of the issue, let's focus on a related aspect of the separate bathrooms argument: discomfort. Usually with this argument comes something along the lines of cis women are uncomfortable sharing a bathroom space with trans women, which would necessitate trans people using separate bathrooms and would justify such policies. First of all, I do have to note that it's strange whenever we have these conversations that it's always trans women. We're never talking about trans men, but that's an entire video in and of itself, so let's not even talk about that right now. Second, being made uncomfortable because of a person or a specific type of person in a bathroom isn't something I can really argue against, because it's not an argument. It's a feeling. And interestingly, according to a study in 2017, it's actually a feeling that is far more likely to be expressed by cis men rather than cis women, despite the conversation always being centered on women's bathrooms. But more directly, to speak to this feeling of discomfort, if you're a cis person watching this, you've probably used the bathroom at the same time as a trans person and you just didn't know it, because trans people, just like you, are there to take care of business and leave. In fact, I bet the trans person in this hypothetical was probably more distressed about using the bathroom than you were, because, and this is based on survey data, using the bathroom isn't really a walk in the park for a trans person. A 2015 survey that included more than 27,000 trans people of different backgrounds found that around 60% of trans people avoided using a public bathroom at some point in their life for fear of encountering problems pertaining to negative social stigma. That same survey found that nearly a quarter of trans people had been confronted and questioned about their choice of bathroom, and that quarter specifically was 4 times more likely to avoid using the bathroom than those who had never been questioned. As I said, for trans people, using the bathroom isn't really a walk in the park. Having your identity questioned as soon as you walk into a certain space isn't really something you want to endure. And again, I would wager that the trans person in this hypothetical was probably more uncomfortable than the cis person ever would be, if the cis person even ever noticed that the person in the bathroom with them was trans to begin with. But the more sinister part of all of this is that this sentiment that trans people should just occupy separate spaces adds to the social stigma of trans people that contributes to negative mental health outcomes. And it should be noted that for every stat I'm bringing up in this video demonstrating the hardship that trans people face, it is almost always worse among trans people of color. That's not the main point of this video, but it is an important nuance to keep in mind when we talk about this. Broadly speaking, we know that general discrimination and bigotry towards trans people makes life harder for them and leads to worse mental health outcomes. But specifically on bathrooms, research published in 2016 states that, quote, both denial of access to bathrooms and denial of access to campus housing killing due to being trans were statistically significantly associated with lifetime suicide attempts, even when controlling for interpersonal victimization. If you're not following me on this point, I'll put it simply. Denying access to bathrooms for trans people is not only societally unjustifiable, but it also directly harms trans people. And it's hard to think that that's not the intent when we see these bathroom bills passed. By not providing inclusive spaces for trans people, we contribute to the social stigma that directly harms an already marginalized group. So I ask you, who's being made to feel discomfort here? Separate but equal only makes things worse. I feel like I shouldn't even have to say that. And if at the end of all of this you say, a cis person may be uncomfortable seeing a trans person in the bathroom, I don't know what to tell you. That isn't an argument. It's a feeling. It's a vibe. And as I will get into in just a moment, a completely unsubstantiated one. Thus, argument 2, the argument that we should just make separate bathrooms, falls flat. Before we get on to the next argument, I want to remind you all that these types of videos would not be possible without the support we get on our Patreon. If you like this kind of content and you want early access to it and more of it in the future, consider becoming a patron. I think the next video might be a little bit more fun and focused on a special somebody. As I said in the John Fetterman video, which you can check out in one of these corners, if you have other ideas for video essay type content, you can let me know and maybe I can turn it into a little video and I'd credit you, of course. Anyways, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And back to the video with
Argument 3. Inclusive bathrooms harm cis women.
Oh, God. This is probably the most utilized argument out of all the ones that we have today. It's the most prevalent, and it's the culmination of all the previous ones. This is what everyone is subtly arguing about when they're trying to make different arguments. The immediate retort is that assault, of course, is already illegal. It's already a crime, and it's something that'll get you arrested, or at least it should. But I think the more steelman version of this argument is that inclusive bathroom policies will make it more likely for cis women to be harmed in the bathroom. The only issue, of course, is that there's no evidence for this. A study out of UCLA in 2018 that focused on localities in Massachusetts with and without inclusive bathroom policies found no evidence to suggest that assaults in bathrooms or locker rooms were made more likely by such policies. And they concluded with the following. Results show that the passage of such non-discrimination laws is not related to the number or frequency of criminal incidents in such public spaces. Additionally, the results show that reports of privacy and safety violations in public restrooms, locker rooms, and changing rooms were exceedingly rare and much lower than statewide rates of reporting violent crimes more generally. This study provides evidence that fears of increased safety and privacy violations as a result of non-discrimination laws are not empirically grounded. It just isn't a thing. Also in 2018, the Texas state legislature was working on a bathroom bill, and Texas law enforcement advocated against the bill.
And I've got news for them. We have yet to find anything that this will prevent, because in truth, this is a purported solution that is in search of a problem, a non-existent problem.
If you lose the Texas police as a Republican, you've completely lost the plot. The police in Texas in that clip said the issue doesn't exist and it would stop them from actually investigating real crimes. It's a solution to a fake problem designed only to demonize trans people. But that was in 2018. That was 6 years ago. The left has gone woke since then, I hear you yelling at your screen. Okay, then find me statistics from 2019 and after that prove your point. Find statistics from after that point that paint a different picture. That's my challenge to you. Despite there being no evidence to suggest these policies are harmful, bathroom bills continue to pass in legislatures across the country, with the most recent one being in Mississippi. Now, I concede that you can probably find an instance of a trans woman doing something bad to a cis woman in a bathroom. But in a country of 350 million people, you can find anybody from any social group doing any bad thing and use that as a way to generalize that group as a whole. And there's a word for that. Bigotry. It'd be like if one immigrant committed a murder, and if I used that murder, that instance of violence, to generalize immigrants as violent entirely, which is something conservatives have been known to do, but again, very bad, and you shouldn't do it. But even if you did manage to find a few cases of trans women committing crimes in a bathroom, are you really going to use those few cases to deprive all trans people from using bathrooms in the future? To discriminate against an entire group of people? It's just not justifiable. Which again is evidence that these policies are designed designed solely to cause harm to trans people. A final related argument to this is that men pretending to be women who aren't actually trans will cynically use these inclusive bathroom policies to slip into women's bathrooms and do something bad, which to them is justification for why we should never have inclusive bathroom policies to begin with. But let's game this out, right? Don't get intellectually lazy on me now. And this is maybe the most important point of this video, so lock in, you and me. If it is truly the case that cis men are weaponizing inclusive bathroom policies so they can be predatory within women's bathrooms, while knowing trans people as an entire social group will catch the flack for it, why are you railing against the rights of trans people and not the individual cis men who are taking advantage of trans people, an already marginalized group? If you actually believe that these policies were enabling predatory cis men, you would be the strongest advocate for the protection of trans people, because you would recognize that these predators are taking advantage of the social stigma that is directed towards them and using it to get away with some devious acts. This would disgust you if you were serious, because you would see that the issue on this policy topic isn't trans women, but cis men shifting blame onto trans women. But instead, you blame the exact group that these predatory cis men in this hypothetical would want you to blame. You're falling into the very trap that would shield predatory cis men from any accountability in broader political discourse. If you actually cared about this issue, you would be protecting trans women, not demonizing them. So, to conclude, inclusive bathroom policies do not make public bathrooms more dangerous. And even if they did, your anger is directed at the wrong people.
Conclusion.
The truth is, there simply isn't evidence to suggest that inclusive bathroom policies are in any way harmful. In fact, the true harm here is restricting who can use the bathroom solely on the basis of their gender identity. Despite the complete lack of evidence, 11 states, all Republican-controlled, have some type of law restricting bathroom use. In some states, even added criminal offenses to bathroom use for trans people. These laws clearly don't exist because the evidence necessitates their existence. So why do we see them all over the place? There's only two reasons. One, we know that restricting bathroom use for trans people is especially harmful, and we know the evidence doesn't suggest that cis women are protected by such restrictions, so we can pretty easily conclude that Republicans want to harm trans people. And two, it's a smokescreen. Conservative policies are unpopular. Their tax policies are unpopular, their environmental policies are unpopular, their abortion policies are unpopular. They need something to justify their continued political existence. And who's an easy group to pick on? Trans people. It's a group that isn't very visible to the broad public, and certainly isn't understood by the broad public, and can very easily be labeled a threat to our traditional way of life. And importantly, it's a group that can be easily excluded from public life without really threatening anybody in the Republican electorate. It's a simple misdirection, a red herring, manufactured to provide a facade, a cover, to Republicans' otherwise unpopular, elitist economic and social policy. And the deeper issue here, of course, is that many on the right just don't believe that trans people are valid. It doesn't matter how many statistics or figures or evidence I use in this video, they will always just retreat into trans people don't exist. It's a convenient way of never dealing with or even thinking about an issue that they've brought to public attention. It is remarkable how Republicans can invent policy issues to avoid ever inventing real policy solutions. It's almost impressive, but truth matters. And the truth is that public bathrooms are public spaces that everybody should have access to, regardless of their gender identity. And denying trans people this fundamental right is not only unjustified, but it's actively harmful. And I want to extrapolate this a little bit further. This isn't just a video about trans people and how mind-boggled I am that conservatives are obsessed with pissing. This is a ballad about the kind of society we want to build. With all the progress we've made in this country over decades and centuries, do we really want a world where a tiny fraction of society is significantly worse off merely because people are unwilling to understand them? Do we really want a society where public spaces funded by citizen tax dollars are required by law to exclude certain people solely because of their gender identity? And do we want to do all of that while abandoning the empirical evidence on the issue? That's not the kind of world I want, and you shouldn't want it either. So the conclusion here, let people piss. And now that we've covered all of the facets of this issue, nobody will ever have to talk about it again. And look, if you're a person of any gender identity and you can't find a bathroom to use,
may I suggest this one?